she said, Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old yesterday. And this is the hero of mine I was telling you about.
Right.
The man whose footsteps I was determined to follow. She said, look, he's not going to be alive forever. You know, wouldn't it be great, she said, if before he died, he could turn on the TV and see you doing something that looked like work. We're sitting here today because of that phone call.
Yeah.
I took my cameraman. We went into the sewers of San Francisco. I applied every lesson I learned from QVC, years of freelancing, all of it, into crawling through a river of crap with a sewer inspector and learning about what it took to keep those sewers working.
Yeah.
And that footage made it onto the air. And it was all wrong for Evening Magazine.
Right.
But it was all right with Discovery.
Yeah.
And Way leads on the way, and here we are.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of American Potential. I'm really excited about today's episode because you're going to know exactly who this guest is when you see his face. Our guest today is a very familiar face, and you've likely encountered either him through his entertaining educational shows or his wide array of compelling narration. He's an Emmy Award-winning TV host, a producer, narrator, a podcaster, a spokesman, a best-selling author, recording artist, and America's foremost champion for skilled trades. Now, his passion for skilled trades has led him to start a scholarship program empowering individuals to pursue careers in that field. I want to welcome our guest for today, Mike Rowe. All right, Mike, hey, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for coming to the hotel and setting up your little portable circus here. I appreciate it. It's great.
Yeah, you're used to this though, right?
You know, I'm kind of used to everything, but not used to anything to the point where I'm comfortable enough to make predictions.
Okay, gotcha.
But I have been here before.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan. Love dirty jobs. Kind of. I mean, is that what kind of really put you on the map? Was dirty jobs or not?
I guess. I mean, my mom would tell a different story. I was in the industry almost 20 years before that.
Yeah. And
freelanced a lot. Probably worked for every major network, every cable company. Narrated hundreds of nature documentaries and documentaries about the universe, and, you know, and oh God, I basically impersonated a host for about 15 years. History Channel, Nat Geo, a lot of Discovery. Right. But I was the guy who could like hit the mark in a battlefield and look at the camera and talk for a minute about whatever the information was on the plaque I had just memorized next to the monument of whoever the soldier was. So I spent a long time creating the illusion of knowledge and competence, you know, where it didn't genuinely exist.
Yeah.
Dirty Jobs happened when I was 42 years old. It was a complete departure from anything I'd done before, primarily because it was a totally honest show. We never did a second take. There was very little pre-production, and I functioned more as a guest instead of a host.
Yeah.
Right. So on that show, The Worker had a chance to be the expert. I was essentially the greenhorn. It was my first day on the job over and over. It was basically Groundhog's Day in a sewer for me right. for about 20 years.
Yeah.
But it worked. People liked it. And that opened doors that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah. Well, I think what worked so well with that, right, is just that it was off the cuff, right? You're just actually learning the stuff. It wasn't rehearsed, right? You didn't
Never
go
rehearsed.
in and learn what a sewer worker did until the day you kind of got there, right?
That's correct. And it was a tough sell for the network, right? Because executives like to see the end before the beginning.
Sure.
They want to know how it's going to end. They want to know what the sunset's going to look like. They want to vet as many things as they can and control as many things as they can. But being a literal sort, I looked at this thing that they were calling reality TV and figured, well, we have to keep it real. And
Yeah.
and how do you do an honest show when you have a second take or a third take? Those are performances.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to try to not just do a show that elevated the dignity of all work in a humorous way, but I wanted to show the viewer what it looked like to make that show. And so we employed a behind the scenes camera that I called the Truth Cam. And it always rolled. It was always there around the edges, showing the crew, showing our frustrations and trying to make the show. So really, Dirty Jobs was a show about the making of a show, about work.
Right.
And it came along at a time when the country, I think, was pretty eager to have a conversation about the definition of a good job.
Yeah.
And how that can change right before your eyes. Because, of course, that's tied into the definition of a good education, which is also a pretty ephemeral, ever-changing thing.
Right.
And so even though what you saw optically was just this relentless miasma of exploding toilets and misadventures in animal husbandry, underneath it was a real love letter to farmers,
Yeah.
and miners and factory workers and construction workers and all of it. It was a big, muddy, greasy, slimy, good-natured love letter to work.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what makes it so successful. It's still successful today, right? I mean, I think it was two things, and I'm saying this as a fan of the show. First of all, your wit. I mean, I think you're pretty quick-witted, sharp-witted, come up with that catchy little retort right away, right?
Well, I mean, thanks. I guess, but see, the thing is, Jeff, most people are, right? Most people on the job site, have kind of, especially with these sorts of jobs, there's something, call it a gallows humor or just an awareness.
Yeah.
You know, it's a band of brothers sort of thing. But there's also on the viewer side that dynamic that happens when you're with your best friends and you're watching a show and you've got the remote in your hands and you have the power to pause it anytime you want and say any full-headed thing that pops into your brain, right?
Sure.
So I wanted to make sure there was the freedom to do that,
right,
interrupted only by the task at hand. So we never cheated on that show. We really did the work. And we didn't always finish it, but by the time the sun went down, you had an honest look at what a day on a pig farm feels like.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to move on to so much else because you've done so many other things besides Dirty Job. But I do have to ask you, your best couple of stories from sort of behind the scenes on Dirty Jobs. What's the one moment you remember biggest screw up on camera, whether it was your cameraman or you personally?
I mean, God, I mean, that was the show.
I know.
Right? I mean, we, like, all the stuff that would typically be edited out of a show, we not only left in, we built it into the promos. You know, we built the entire show on mistakes.
Right.
Because honestly, most of us make more mistakes.
Right.
Most of us get it wrong more than we get it right. So we wanted to make sure that we had that in there. It's tricky. I mean, there was a lot of life and death stuff, to be honest, and I didn't fully appreciate it at the time. But, we were in very hazardous environments week after week after week. So, when you're, 1,200 feet in the air on a radio tower trying to figure out how to shoot the scene, and something doesn't go quite right, the pucker factor is real.
Well, I can tell you, I would never be in that position because I wouldn't want to be up there. That didn't bother you?
Sure, it bothered me because I'm not a stunt junkie.
Yeah.
And Dirty Jobs helped open the door to a lot of different genres and a lot of different shows. And many of those did employ real risk takers, who just embraced that part of it. I tried to come at it as honestly as I could. And so to answer your question, there were lots and lots of moments. Early on, I remember hosting an episode, actually it was Shark Week, and Dirty Jobs was the center of Shark Week. We were doing, I think it was called Jobs That Bite that year. So I was out with shark biologists. I was out with all sorts of people in that industry. And I met the guy who made the the stainless steel shark suit. A guy called Jeremiah Sullivan is his name. And he invited me to make one of these suits with him. It's held together with thousands of little welds. It's like an Ivanhoe suit of armor.
Wow.
And researchers and divers wear them purportedly because they'll keep you from being bitten in half by a shark. So I agreed to make one of these things. And then Jeremiah, somewhat jokingly, I thought, said, okay, time to test it. How do you test a shark suit?
Sure.
Well, long story short, what you do is you take the research vessel out a few miles and you dump 100 gallons of blood and guts into the water, and you attract 30 or 40 gray sharks, all taller than us. And when they're swimming around in a complete frenzy, you put your suit on, complete with a whole diving rig, and you jump in the middle of them, and you let them bite you. And drag.
Sounds fun.
It's great fun.
Yeah.
We were 60 feet down at one point, kneeling on the bottom of the ocean. I had a shark on my leg and another one on my shoulder. They shake you like a tug toy, right? I mean, it's unbelievable power.
I bet.
And so, you start to question your career decisions and your life choices, right? And you glance over, and there's Jeremiah, the expert, okay? Upside down, shark swims by him. The tail knocks his regulator out of his mouth. All right, so now the expert is upside down. There's so much blood in the water, you don't know if it's his or yours or the chum. And when you're kneeling on the bottom of the ocean and you feel your brand new stainless steel shark suit filling up with the undeniable warmth of your own urine. It's a moment. It's a moment. And so, all of that aired. And people, they got their piece of holy crap, look at that. They got their little adrenaline rush. But we also learned about welding. Yeah. And we learned a lot about the animal kingdom. And we learned a lot about sharks. Yeah. And that was my job. I was a lab rat, essentially.
Sure.
Human guinea pig.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, so the way I heard it, you started. We were just talking about this before the interview started. Yeah, podcasts are amazing now. Like the explosion in podcasts and how many there are, and things. But a few years ago, when did you start? The way I heard it,
I want to say that was probably 2016, 2015, and even prior to that, I had been writing short stories. In the style of Paul Harvey, who used to have a radio show called The Rest of the Story.
Right.
And I miss those. I remember as a kid up in the woodpile with my dad and my granddad chopping wood, and there was always a transistor, and there was Paul Harvey always in the background telling me something I didn't know about somebody I did. And, you get to figure out who he's talking about.
Right.
And it's studies show, Jeff, it's just physically impossible to turn that off until you hear Paul Harvey say, and now you know the rest of the story. So, I missed a flight one time because I couldn't get out of the car in long-term parking because I was listening to one of his stories. So anyhow, I traveled an awful lot for Dirty Jobs and the shows I worked on after that. And spent a lot of time in greasy spoons and trains and planes. And I just started to write to pass the time. Those stories, a friend of mine said, you should put them on a podcast. Everybody's got a podcast. Well, I didn't even know what that really meant. And then one day, my buddy pulled me aside and said, hey, genius, got like 140 million downloads here. There might be something to it.
Yeah, right.
So I started taking it a bit more seriously, got advertisers and stuff, and wrote a book of the same name, which did pretty well. And then somebody started turning those stories into TV shows over on TBN. So we got 6 seasons of something called The Story Behind the Story, which are just recreations of these little mysteries I was writing. Right. So the whole thing got totally out of hand. And then, as you know, it's harder to be good in the short term than it is the long term. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to leave the podcast world, so I eventually succumbed and started having guests on. And so today I do exactly what you're doing here. Sometimes when I'm on the road, I have an office in Santa Monica. I'll go down there and record them. And of course, like everybody else, I got a little setup at home. So I'll wander downstairs in my underwear and my bathrobe and a cup of coffee and cozy up to the mic, and tell stories and listen to them.
Yeah.
It's pretty great.
Well, that's essentially what you are, right? As a storyteller. And you're a teller. I think that's what makes Dirty Jobs so popular, the way I heard it so popular. All the work that you're doing is you're really bringing voice to people who have what is maybe an undervalued job by society, but you're kind of bringing that to life.
Look, thank you. I hope so. I think it might be a little grand. Like, I don't think I could write storyteller on my resume or business card without sounding a little douchey, But look, it's true in that, Paul Harvey's not with us anymore.
Yeah.
And neither is Charles Kuralt, and neither is Studs Terkel, and neither is George Plimpton. And, a lot of guys who really embraced story and came at it in a slightly different way. I mention those names, not because I think for a second that I can fill their shoes, but to follow in their footsteps is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I would say more than telling stories, Dirty Jobs gave me permission to tap the country on the shoulder and say once a week, hey, get a load of him, get a load of her. Wait till you meet them. Wait till you see what they do. And because that show was so transparent and so honest, the viewers wound up programming it. All the suggestions for the show after the first season came from viewers. And so that was pretty great, right? I mean, I had essentially viewers doing the work of a production company.
Yeah.
And also they were hosting the show too. All I really had to do was show up and try.
Yeah.
And so the viewers saw that. They got a story along the way. And then they got an honest behind the scenes look at what it took to make the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I wound up getting a lot of credit for being, well, the word at the time was authentic.
Yeah.
Right? Like in the same way that train in the background right now is giving your sound guy a heart attack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly the same.
Right. Now we can either pretend it's not there.
Yeah. Or embrace it.
Or just go, look, man, we're in Vegas, right? We're 200 feet in the air.
There's lots going on.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So like viewers know that.
Yeah.
And when you let them see that,
right,
and when you acknowledge that you know it too, then you appear honest.
Right.
Now, whether you are or not is not for me to say,
sure.
right? But in our industry, the appearance of honesty and the feeling of authenticity, that matters.
Yeah. So do you consider yourself, I mean, part of what you do is a reporter, like you're reporting on stories, you're telling stories. I mean, it's kind of an interesting mix of what you've done your whole career.
It's not quite reportage.
Yeah.
I mean, with great respect to the industry, I would certainly, in this day and age, never call myself a journalist. I don't know what that means anymore, honestly.
Yeah. Well, you probably don't want to be known as a journalist in today's world.
I've never seen a term once so universally noble become such a confused bit of linguistic ambiguity.
Right.
I mean, wow. I'm more inclined to think there was a guy called John Hendricks who created the Discovery Channel literally out of thin air. In his garage, he did an extraordinary deal with John Malone way back in the day and bartered for, I think, with Westinghouse for a little sliver of a satellite up there in the sky. And he licensed some documentaries from Australia, and he just started beaming them down into this new thing called cable TV. And people saw it, and they were hungry for it. And John said to me once, he said, my job fundamentally is to satisfy curiosity. And I said, that's a pretty great way to distill your purpose. And he went on to say, not just yours and not just whoever might be listening, but my own.
Yeah.
And that made an impression, right?
Yeah.
Because if the first thing a good comedian does is amuse himself, then the odds are pretty good that people in the audience are going to go along for the ride.
Right.
Well, I think if a good journalist today, if the first thing they do is try and satisfy their own curiosity, rather than try and write stories that they think are going to be embraced by the audience they believe they have, right? I mean, it's kind of the difference between Well, it's what a focus group is.
Right.
And it's why I hate them so much. And why,
right.
I'm sure in politics, and it's the focus group is the thing that gets rid of all the horrible ideas and all the great ideas. It just leaves you with
the mushy middle,
the squishy middle, whether it's TV, whether it's journalism, whether it's anything. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that I feel like I'm doing the best job I can when I'm satisfying my own curiosity, and I'm doing it in a way that doesn't really involve questions like, gosh, what's the audience going to think?
Right.
What are the advertisers going to think?
Right. Yeah. What do you suppose that noise is? Do you think it's a dentist's office below us and they're drilling?
Well, if it is,
fillings?
The patient just lost their head. That would be the largest mouth drill in the history of. I'm going to say there's construction going on here at wherever we are, Delano, Mandalay.
Yeah.
And they have decided that they just don't care that you and I are up here exchanging the sorts of ideas.
Yeah.
And look, I don't want to overstate it, but ideas that can obviously change the trajectory of Western civilization.
Yeah, of course. But they're doing dirty jobs, and that's just as important, as you say, right?
Absolutely. The work goes on.
Well, that's right. Okay, so as you've given voice to folks in these trade schools, your work lately, I think, has brought on a little more. I'd call it advocacy, right? Certainly for the trades. Mm-hmm. And you, as I said, it started out giving voice to people who were in the trades who didn't, maybe go to a 4-year college and get their degree. But it's turned into much more than that, and trying to help America understand how important those trade jobs are, and how important it is, how much money you can make going out and getting learning a trade.
There's so much there, Jeff. I mean, the myths and the misperceptions and the stigmas and the stereotypes that keep people from exploring a career in the trades. I could talk about them for hours. They're real, and they need to be challenged, and they need to be debunked. But look, I'm not a crusader, and I don't know. I guess I'm an advocate.
Yeah.
But full disclosure, the foundation evolved a lot like Dirty Jobs did. It was a very Forrest Gumpian kind of thing. The show was very at its peak, I guess, in 2008, and we were going into a recession, as you'll recall, back then. And there was an awful lot of talk in the national news about unemployment. And on Dirty Jobs, it was odd because everywhere we went, we saw these help wanted signs. Right. So, there was another narrative going on, and no one was really talking about the fact that with 12 million people unemployed, we still had 2.5 million open positions. Most of them didn't require a 4-year degree. And most of the people who welcomed us into their homes and places of business on Dirty Jobs, we would always have a frosty beverage at the end of the day, and I'd ask them questions about their industry and about their job and what the challenges were. And the number one challenge running away was always recruiting. Even at a time of sky-high unemployment, the thing we heard again and again was how difficult it was to find people with a real work ethic who wanted to learn a skill that was in demand. And so it just seemed like, because I had a pretty good platform by that point, that it would be nice to at least shine a light on those opportunities, to make a case for opportunity.
Right.
That's what I wanted to do. The fans of the show helped build a virtual, basically a trade resource center, we called it. So anybody in the country could put in a zip code and find welding jobs or plumbing jobs or electric and heating, air conditioning, and all that stuff. And then it morphed into a scholarship fund. Today, we've given away a little over $9 million. We call them work ethic scholarships. And they're specifically not for 4-year schools. They're for young men and women who want to learn a skill. And any vocation that requires training we're pretty much wide open to it.
Yeah.
So that took off, and that struck a chord because, well, it's been almost 16 years now. We started on Labor Day in 2008. And unfortunately, the 2.3 million jobs that were open then are now closer to 11 million. So maybe I'm making it worse. I don't know. But the headlines are still what they are. And there's still a a mismatch. It's not just a skill gap, though. It's a will gap in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So finding people who are willing to do the jobs that are currently going begging it's a big undertaking, and I have no hope of moving the needle single-handedly.
Yeah.
But I've got some great partners, and in fact, we're here in Vegas today. We were over at Western High this morning, partnered with the Ingolstadt Foundation here locally. Mm-hmm. So we've got a $4 or $5 million program over there that's going to award 50 to 100 of these full ride scholarships to kids coming out of that zip code. That's never happened before. And, I'm really pleased to do it and happy to talk about it, because I think it could be a template for districts all over the country, both to partner with MikeRoweWORKS and other foundations like Ingolstadt and Americans for Prosperity and so many people who do a lot of good work in this space.
Yeah.
So sorry for the filibuster, but that's that's what's going on with MikeRoweWORKS.
Well, it's great work that you're doing. Thinking back when you got your start, you were an opera singer, right?
Well, I mean, look, I've skied down mountains before, but I wouldn't call myself a skier.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, compared to me, you're an opera singer.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Let's just go with that.
Well, it was 8 years. 8 years in the Baltimore Opera. Yeah.
Eight years. Well, then you were an opera singer.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Fair enough.
And did local news stations you worked at, right?
Well, I did. In fact, I wound up in San Francisco years later, hosting a show called Evening Magazine, which came on after the local news.
Right.
That's actually where Dirty Jobs got its start. Yeah.
Do you ever watch those?
Not
Go
on
back
purpose.
and look at it? No.
You know what? I do.
Yeah.
Evening Magazine is a fascinating vehicle. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will remember it, but you can draw a straight line from segments on that show to entire networks today. Like the Green Grocer came out of Evening Magazine and became the Food Network, right? So the fitness and finance and all of these different little niche-y things in this old magazine format, they've gone on to become their entire channels.
Yeah.
And so I was the host of that show in San Francisco. And I had a lot of freedom there to host the show from any location I wanted. And one day, after a phone call from my mother, I was inspired to take the cameras into a sewer, and Dirty Jobs was born.
Right.
So you never know.
Did you ever think back then that you'd be able to do the kinds of things? Because you're blessing a lot of people and you're helping a lot of people in, learn trades and all the things that you've been able to do over your career. I mean, you couldn't have imagined that back at the beginning, right?
No. I mean, I'll tell you how far afield it was and how preposterous it was. I wanted very much to follow in my grandfather's footsteps. His name was Carl Noble. He was an electrician by trade, but he was also a plumber and a steam fitter and a pipe fitter and a welder. And, he could build a house without a blueprint. He was just that guy with that chip.
Sure.
Yeah. And I learned early on that the handy gene was recessive, right?
Okay,
I mean,
sure.
it was a brutal lesson, to realize just because you love something doesn't mean you can't suck at it. And I didn't have the natural gifts he had. He was the guy that encouraged me to get a different toolbox, to go to a community college, to start studying things that I had no interest in, because who knows, right?
Yeah.
You just don't know. That's what wound up getting me into the opera and then into narrating and then singing and all these different things.
It didn't have anything to do with your voice, I would imagine.
Well, the truth is I had not a debilitating stutter, but I had a stammer as a kid. I had a weirdly low voice, and I had a hard time using it. So I got very lucky. I had some teachers who were like Mr. Holland, teachers who could take you by the scruff of the neck and say, no, not that way, this way.
Yeah.
I had a scoutmaster who was transformational in getting me out of my comfort zone. My dad was great at that. My grandfather was the best. I've had men in my life who all good-naturedly in their own way pushed me out of the place where I thought I wanted to be. And I had no idea. I could never have known at the time that I was basically being prepared to do a show where I was a perpetual apprentice. Right. Where I would be uncomfortable for 20 years, out of my element, not just uncomfortable physically or frightened, but, like the real secret sauce on dirty jobs, it just demanded a measure of humility that frankly I didn't have, when I started it. When you're used to being a host, you want to be in control.
Yeah.
You want to be calling the shots. I had to let go of all of that.
Yeah.
So there was no way I could have ever imagined that I would wind up working as an avatar or a cipher or a guest and becoming this weird conduit through which viewers could get a sense of a vocation that they didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
It was impossible that could happen.
But are you saying you didn't have the humility to do it and you had to learn the humility to do it? I think for a lot of people who are fans of the things that you've done, probably find that a little hard to believe.
Well, look, I have a healthy ego. My business partner who's sitting here right now would be the first to confirm it. But it's been a real ride. I was fairly sure I had my business figured out. I was fairly sure. I was an avid freelancer when I was 42 years old. I had hundreds of jobs. I worked when I wanted to. I was very good at getting hired. I didn't care, Jeff, what the job was. Mm-hmm. I had I was an assassin, like a true freelancer.
You're right.
Like, the etymology of that word?
Yeah.
Freelance?
Mm-hmm.
Like comes from, ancient medieval times. Well, a knight whose lance was free. He served no lord.
Okay.
Right? He was for hire. I loved that model. And I freelanced for 20 years in the entertainment business. And I had no interest at all in deviating from that. I didn't want a hit show. I didn't look for hits. In fact, I looked for losers. I looked for ideas that were so bad, so poorly conceived, that no amount of luck or talent could possibly redeem them. I would attach myself to these losers and do the best work I could, get paid, and then watch somewhat gleefully as the whole thing went down the drain. Infomercials, doomed sitcoms, talk shows, movie parts, more infomercials. It didn't matter.
These have to exist somewhere. On YouTube, I can't find. Can I find an infomercial?
Are you
a
kidding?
Mike Rowe infomercial?
I don't know how you can't find it. You Google Mike Rowe QVC right now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So it's like, I was fired from QVC 3 times in 3 years. From 1990 to 1993, I worked the graveyard shift.
Okay.
I learned everything I needed to know in this industry, from figuring out how to fill 8 minutes of dead air, talking about a product I'd never seen before and didn't really understand.
Right.
That was a baptism by fire. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was the best training I could have ever had for whatever it is I do today.
Why were you fired from QVC? What would just give us one of the 3 times?
Well, in general, because, my first night, they brought me something called the Health Team Infrared Pain Reliever, which looked like a flashlight. It was basically infrared light. And according to the little blue card that accompanied every product, you turn on the Health Team Infrared Pain Reliever and you rub it on your arthritic knuckles.
Yeah.
And then you're just, awash in relief.
Sure.
It's a miracle. It's 1999. I didn't know if it was real or not.
Sure.
Everything, you have to know, at QVC, there was no training program. If you could talk about a pencil for 8 minutes, you were given a 3-month probationary run, right?
Okay.
And that just meant they put you on in the middle of the night and they just bring you stuff.
Sure.
And most people flame out because it's nerve-wracking. It's live TV.
Sure.
There's no delay and there's no training. So, you sink or swim. So I'm sitting there and they bring me the Health Team Infrared Pain Reliever and I look at the little blue card and I just have no idea what I'm doing. And I look up at the camera and I say, hi, America. It's me, Mike Rowe. I'm new here. This is an hour of ideas to make your life easier. That was what the hour was called here on QVC. And I said our first item is called the Healthium Infrared Pain Reliever. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know what it is or how it works. But as you see, there's an 800 number on the screen right now. And I'd be so grateful if one of you would just give that a call. My producer is Marty. He'll put you through, and maybe you could explain to me, what the hell this thing does. Well, it was like a chapter out of Huck Finn or something.
Yeah.
I mean, people called, lots of people, and they immediately told me how it worked, and then they critiqued my performance throughout the hour. All I did was take phone calls, not as testimonials, but from people who wanted to help me do my job.
Sure, of course.
And so, again, that was an amazing lesson. I didn't know I was learning it at the time, but it has to do with the, in the old nature documentaries I used to narrate and still do, they call it the submissive posture, right? When a little wolf runs into a big wolf out in the wild, they just lie back and expose their belly as if to say, look, I get it, man. You could eat me alive.
Yeah.
If we fight, I lose. Let's just acknowledge that now. And maybe you don't eat me or kill me.
That's right.
Right. That's what I was doing on QVC.
On QVC. Gotcha.
And look, that was before I started freelancing in earnest, but I was learning then that humility does matter. And if you don't know what you're doing, you might as well admit it. Right? Because it's just a lot easier than the alternative. Now, my bosses hated that. And so I was on very, very thin ice for a long time, really for the whole time. And then, look, things just went off the rails. I looked at it as a talk show, a 3-hour talk show. I made fun of the products that I thought should be made fun of. And I had way too much fun with the viewers.
Yeah.
The lack of a delay led to violations, FCC violations that happily didn't apply because it was cable.
Sure.
But were so horrifying. I mean, I can't even tell you those stories on your nice G-rated, family-friendly podcast.
Yeah, of course.
But things went so...
We're not regulated by the government, though. So.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
But you are still, I'm sure, under the confines of good taste.
Well, we try.
I don't want to challenge your
I
viewers' sensibilities. But look, man, when you're sitting there trying to make sense of an insane world, and the product coordinator brings you the next item, and the next item is a collectible doll, and you don't even understand that people collect these things, right? And the doll happens to be dressed as a nun, and her name is Sister Mary Margaret, right? And she's wearing steel-rimmed spectacles, and you're just talking about Catholicism and dolls, right? And the next thing you know, you've got a jewelry ruler. They've always got the rulers on QVC. And you've jammed that into the nun's hand, and she's spanking your hand with the ruler. And then you got her over your head, and you're singing the theme from The Flying Nun. And none of this is approved, And of course, the nun's a musical nun, and if you wind her up, she plays Climb Every Mountain, which strikes you as hysterically funny. So you're laughing as you're trying to describe it, and you're also looking for the winder on the nun, right? But you can't find it because it's not in the small of her back where you think it would be. It's not between her shoulder blades. It's nowhere. And you start searching the nun for the winder, and you're on national television.
Is this where the fine comes in?
Well, this is where things look. I mean, thankfully, the technical director, the producer's screaming at the technical director to cut away, because it looks like I'm groping a nun. And of course, they cut away to a tight shot of an identical nun in the light box, but my mic is still open. And now my search for the winder has become somewhat frantic. And I finally located just like a little protrusion in the lowest possible part of the small of her back. In other words, it's her butt, man.
Yeah,
like there's a little chrome-plated dingleberry sticking out of the nun's butt, and if you wind it up, she's going to play Climb Every Mountain. But I can't wind it up because her habit's so tight. So now the nun's upside down in my lap. I'm holding her head between my thighs. Her habit is down around her waist, and I'm leaning over her, winding her up off camera. But then, of course, they cut back to you on camera.
Sure.
That is when it's clear that you've broken the laws of God and man, and you snatch your hand out of the nun's nether regions, and the sound of Climb Every Mountain fills the studio. and then you're asked to leave and not come back. These things happen to me all of the time. Every couple of months on QVC, something deeply inappropriate would happen. I would be chastised. Viewers would write in to say, "No, don't fire him. We love him. It was all in good fun," and I'd get another chance. And it went on like that for years.
That is so great. Yeah. So, but you learned some humility there. You learn a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what you really learn that's just as important is who your audience is. Even though you can't see them, you start to form a sense of who they are, like an amalgam.
Yeah.
You probably have one. Like, you haven't met all your listeners, but
sure.
There's something in your mind
of who they are.
Right.
Right.
And that's really important. Stephen King talks about it. He refers to his fans, what's he call them? Constant reader. So in his mind, he always knows who he's writing for. And I learned back in those days that I had an idea of who I was always talking to.
Right.
And that came in useful.
Yeah.
And so when I was fired for the final time, richly and deservedly so from QVC, I was rehabilitated by Joan Rivers, who gave me my final chance. And then that's when my freelancing career began. And for the next 12 years, I went about the business of booking jobs I didn't want, getting them, saving my money, and working like a freelancer in this business. And I would still be doing that today had I not wound up at Evening Magazine, hosting that ridiculous show that nobody really watched, and that phone call from my mom that came in, it would have been 2001. She said, "Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old yesterday." And this is the hero of mine I was telling you about,
right.
The man whose footsteps I was determined to follow. She said, "Look, he's not going to be alive forever. Wouldn't it be great?" She said, "if before he died, he could turn on the TV and see you doing something that looked like work." And that's how we're sitting here today, because of that phone call.
Yeah.
I took my cameraman. We went into the sewers of San Francisco. I applied every lesson I learned from QVC, years of freelancing, all of it, into crawling through a river of crap with a sewer inspector and learning about what it took to keep those sewers working.
Yeah.
And that footage made it onto the air. And it was all wrong for Evening Magazine.
Right.
But it was all right with Discovery.
Yeah.
And way leads on the way, and here we are.
Yeah. That's great. Now, you've gotten California. You live in California, is that right?
Yeah.
Live in California, and you've seen kind of how messed up Californians become.
I sure have.
The PRO Act. You did a video, which is amazing. I encourage people to watch the video that you've done on the PRO Act. And really, it's about the ability of workers to work in the way they want to work, that they choose to work. Tell us about that and how you've gotten active in trying to stop this legislation.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I guess the story starts years ago when I ran into Charles Koch at an event.
Right.
And I gave a speech, and he was in the audience, and he invited me to lunch, and he said, "I'd like to support your efforts." And I said, "I'd be happy to have your support." So MikeRoweWORKS benefited immensely from his generosity. He went on he had a thing back then called the Seminar Network, which has since sort of morphed into Stand Together,
right,
of which AFP is a part.
Right.
Anyway, I just liked it. I liked the work that they were doing, and I took an interest in many of the foundations that Stand Together supports. And while that was happening, I was also watching what I see as a kind of war on work, very broadly, like in a lot of different ways. I think we've declared some kind of action against work,
right?
And I think that Dirty Jobs was kind of an antidote to that. And a lot of what I do in my foundation is sort of designed to push back against it. But it's funny, once you start looking for a thing, you'll find it.
Right.
Right. Well, whatever it is you're looking for.
Yeah.
The brain is a very persistent organ.
Yeah.
It'll find it. And so I just started looking for bad laws and bad ideas and bad policies that were fraught with unintended consequences. And back in 2019, I found one. It was an assembly bill called AB5, which came out of a woman who used to, I think her last name was Gonzalez, and she worked for the Teamsters for a time, and she got the bill to Gavin Newsom, and he signed it. And basically what this bill did, it was motivated by the idea that thousands of workers were being deliberately misclassified by their employers as independent contractors when they should have been employees. And the argument went that this deliberate misclassification allowed these greedy and rapacious employers to abuse these workers by not giving them benefits, by not paying certain insurances or pensions or overtime or any number of benefits that most Californian employees are entitled to. So I looked a little closer at it, and it seemed pretty clear that the problem was being wildly overstated. And then when you looked at AB5 and the ABC rule of who qualifies as a freelancer, and I don't want to get into the weeds with it, but the bottom line was, even if the problem as described was real, the solution was like going after a fly with a bazooka. The AB5 bill put about 50,000 independent truckers out of business. It had a similar impact to graphic designers and cameramen and artists and real estate people and freelance writers. The whole gig economy in California became the enemy. This whole thing sort of evolved as an attempt, subsidized by the unions, to get Uber and Lyft and DoorDash to become union shops, right? So the more layers you peel back, the more you look at this and the more you realize, God, this, and it's personal for me because, as we've just discussed, I love my freelancing career.
Sure.
I love the freedom to work when I want and to take my retirement in early, brief installments if I so choose. That comes with some risk. I understand that. But for me, it was I just loved it. And for everybody I knew who embraced that lifestyle, it was personal and we loved it. What I didn't know, Jeff, was how many people we're talking about. I thought it was hundreds of thousands, maybe a million.
Right.
It's over 70 million people.
Wow.
are being impacted by this assault on freelance. And that's really what it is, because it didn't stop in California. This thing passed in California,
right,
and now it's moldering before Congress. It's called the PRO Act,
right,
and it's no different than as advertised in California. So they want to bring this policy national, and I do think it's a bad idea. And
yeah.
I try and stay in my lane for the most part. I'm not a political animal, but I do talk a lot about education and workforce, and this is that. This is our freedom to work the way we want. You take that away, and I don't know how anybody can argue that we're free.
Right.
It's just an essential part of being an American and choosing things and embracing some level of personal accountability and self-reliance.
Yeah.
And it's tricky for me because my foundation helps a lot of people who are currently in trade unions. I've got no axe to grind. I don't need trouble with the unions.
Sure.
But the right to work trumps it all. And so whatever's best for the individual,
right,
is what I'm behind. And for 70 million Americans, this is not what's best.
Yeah. So you talked about whatever is best for the individual. To me, I've been in the fight for liberty and freedom my whole life. I mean, I love America because of everything it provides, not only the ability to go out, do what you want to do, become, there's countries, China, they tell you at a very early age what you're going to be when you grow up. Yeah. We don't do that here, although sometimes our government tries to force us into a box. It's ultimately, to me, it's about liberty and freedom. Tell me your thoughts on that. How special is America to provide that to its citizens through the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, but also as it relates to work?
It's singular, it's unexampled, and it's critical. And it's easy not to appreciate it because if you haven't traveled abroad,
right,
and even if you haven't traveled much in the country, then you're really going to have a fairly insulated understanding of this, because it's just ideas, right? I mean, it's ideas on paper, and you read about them, and maybe you learn about them in history class, but it's very different to see firsthand, those ideas in motion and those ideas suppressed. So if you haven't traveled abroad, and if you don't really understand what liberty looks like when it's not in the room, then you're not going to have a real appreciation for it when it is. And look, there's some surveys out there that are troubling. One of them, Bobby Kennedy talks about a lot. It's back in 2012, something like 82% of people under 30 described America as a great place. Today, the number's like 8%.
Wow.
That's a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a real problem. I saw one that's equally troubling. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal not long ago, but it had to do with the American dream. In fact, that's what Stand Together is focused on now, redefining the American dream.
Right.
So 64%, I think, of Americans believe the dream is either dead or no longer applicable to them. Well, what happens when it gets to 70 or 75? You're talking about hope. And so, look, I believe that a lot of those people think opportunity is dead and that the system is rigged. I don't dispute that times are tough and that it can feel like that in this zip code or maybe that zip code. But I think they're painting with a very broad brush. And a lot of what I'm trying to do with MikeRoweWORKS is push back against that basic idea. I partner with companies all the time who are able to show me what progress and prosperity looks like, in their lane. There's a guy now who I'm really looking forward to working with over at a company called GroundWorks. GroundWorks probably has 19 or 20 companies under its corporate umbrella. They just restructured their whole financial format and made all of these workers owners, like thousands of young men mostly. The vast majority have a high school diploma and nothing else. And Matt, the guy who's running the show over there, is like, look, Mike, I can show you example after example of people who started at 50 or 60 grand a year. These guys work on foundations and waterproofing, right? Houses that have fundamental cracks in their foundation. So if you're looking for a metaphor for the country, right? There it is.
There it is.
These are the guys who crawl under the house where nobody wants to go, and they make it all better. And within 14 months, there is a straight path for those guys to be making $120,000 a year doing that work. It requires no special skill training. It requires no college degree. What it requires is the right to work and the willingness to crawl under a house or someplace most people don't want to go to do a thing that most people don't want to do. So I just say all that because if you're going to dismiss the American dream as dead, you're going to have a harder time doing it if I can show you hundreds of opportunities like this that absolutely positively exist and many thousands of openings for those exact opportunities. that are really and truly there.
Yeah.
Those opportunities are an essential part of this dream thing. And redefining that and reinvigorating that is not so different than redefining and reinvigorating the trades or our whole education system. All of that. It's the freedom to try. It's the freedom to fail. It's the freedom to sit there like an idiot at 3 a.m. with the health team infrared pain reliever and try and figure out a way. You know, it's to crawl through a sewer, to take a pie in the face, right? I mean, we have to protect the ability to do that, and we have to do it in a way that feels hopeful and still shows humor, because without those, we're not quite human, you know.
Yeah. And
I'm not ready to give up on that either.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, if folks want to know more about what you're doing, MikeRoweWORKS and all of that, how do they learn more?
Well, you can go to MikeRoweWORKS.org. That's my name, MikeRowe Works. And in real time right now, we're in the midst of another work ethic scholarship application period. So we give away a couple $1 million a year in these scholarships. And again, these are for people who are not going to a 4-year school. So the next generation of plumbers, steam fitters, pipe fitters, welders, cosmetologists, anything that requires a skill, kinds of jobs my granddad did, honestly, to really bring it back to where we started. Go apply. The money's burning a hole in my pocket, and it's harder to give away than you think, because there are some hoops to jump through.
Yeah.
You got to make a case for yourself. There's a short essay, videos, references, things like this. But that's what we're doing here in Vegas over at Western High, and we're doing it all over the country. And if anybody listening has a son or daughter, or grandson, or you yourself, you're welcome to apply. We'd love to help.
Yeah, sounds great. You never would have imagined you were doing all of this back when you were doing whatever you're doing to the nun on QVC, right?
That nun still calls me, by the way. I miss her.
All right. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for all you do.
You bet.
Well, what an honor to talk with Mike Rowe and all the great things that he's done. All because he got fired from QVC. That was great. What a great story. It was kind of hard to do that interview and not laugh the whole time. I didn't even get to Deadliest Catch. I didn't even get to talk about Deadliest Catch. I'm disappointed. Maybe someday we'll have Mike Rowe back. I think Mike Rowe has shined a light on America and on work in America and how important work is and the value that you get out of what it is that you do for work and how important all of these jobs are. The unsung heroes across America that we see day in and day out. So it was great having Mike on. Thanks for all that you do. Thanks for watching the podcast on YouTube, for listening to the podcast on whatever platform you listen on. You can always find us on AmericanPotential.com. Visit there. We'd love to get your feedback. You can send me an email at jeff@AmericanPotential.com. Thanks for being with us. Remember, freedom and liberty. We've got to defend freedom and liberty. It's precious. Don't forget that. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.